Apologies, I think the sound quality wasn't so great, but hopefully it'll improve for the next video we show. So I'd like to introduce my good friend and colleague, Rabbi Alissa Wise. Alissa, do you want to say just a few opening words before we share some images from the action during Passover?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's a nice part of the action life cycle to have people to tell the story to. So thank you for receiving the story and then becoming part of it with us. So this action was put together by Rabbis for Ceasefire. We are a new collection of rabbis and Jewish clergy that have come together since October to call together in one voice for a ceasefire. And over the months that we've been together, we kind of how we define and understand ceasefire continues to expand as the conditions change, right? And as the demand for saving lives becomes more urgent and takes different shapes. So in the past few months, we have taken action where we have kind of tried to straddle two important obligations for us as rabbis. The first is to use our moral power to save lives and fight for ceasefire, which is the primary purpose of our group. And the second is also to safeguard the moral center of Judaism for future generations, right? Which is not the most, arguably, not the most important thing at this time, right? At this time, what's most important is saving lives. And at the same time, we've had the opportunity as Rabbis for Ceasefire to kind of bridge those two things, right? Through the way that we kind of allow Jewish tradition to guide how we take action in this time and how we live out our commitment to realizing ceasefire. So we are a collection of rabbis that are across the denominational spectrum and to some extent across a political spectrum. And we are over 330 now, which is wonderful and exciting to see so many Jewish clergy stepping up in this time. And so when we kind of, as we've gone through these months, it's like we've kind of been in this wrestle with ourselves of like needing to plan for what's next, but just praying with all of our might that a ceasefire will be realized and whatever we have planned won't be necessary. And so when it came time to think about how do we commemorate Passover, right? We had already been through Hanukkah where we did public ritual of candle lighting, and we had been through Purim, right? Where we kind of talked about how do you kind of fulfill the obligations of Purim in a ceasefire, and what are the ways that we can use the mitzvot of Purim to kind of further our commitment to ceasefire and our action for ceasefire. And so when it came to Passover, I think we ourselves as rabbis and also the congregants and the Jewish community of which we are a part, kind of like we're very early on kind of wrestling with like, how are we going to celebrate Passover this year? I don't know if that resonates for any of you that, like Passover came with some amount of dread, right? Of how do we celebrate freedom? How do we talk about liberation? How do we read the words of our tradition, right? The all who are hungry come and eat. Like, how do we do that, right? And without feeling like hypocrites or without feeling, like how do we do it? And so it became clear to us that a primary obligation, given the way that the Magid section of the Passover Seder, begins with the words "Kol divkin yiteve yichol," right? All who are hungry come and eat, right? And that we kind of understand that if our tradition is going to mean anything, right, in the future, we have to kind of have a huge amount of integrity about how we sync up our practices and our words. So, we got on a call, we were brainstorming actions, and we had like an hour-long call with a group of people who had raised their hands to be like, I'm down to figure out whatever we're going to do for Passover. And we kind of hemmed and hawed and was like, oh no, not this, not that. And then we had like 5 minutes left in the hour. And I was like, well, I guess I should tell you that I have had this harebrained idea of like, what if we brought rabbis to bring food to Gaza? Like, it seemed to be like, and everybody was like, oh, that is what we should do, and so I was like, I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner. It seems so ridiculous. Like, could we really pull that off? And what would it mean to pull it off, like, in a month? And then from there, what was actually pretty amazing about the action planning experience, which hopefully some of you have had this opportunity to organize in this time, in this spirit, but basically it just was like a cascade of yeses that came after that, right? We had the idea that you reach out to one person of like, what do you think? And then it was like, yes, and I was like, we reached out to, first was to reach out to Israeli leftists on the ground and say like, what do you think about this? Like, is this crazy? And then people would be like, yes, we should do that, right? And then reaching out to rabbis and being like, what do you think about going? And then people saying yes. And reaching out to donors to try to fund the expenses of the trip, and donor after donor saying yes, yes, yes. And then I started reaching out wider to Palestinian comrades that I've been working with over the years to get their advice. I'm like, does this make sense? And they were like, yes, and let me connect you over here. And so then I got connected actually to the United Nations, to UNRWA, because part of the initial idea is that we could actually have collaborated with them to try to bring their aid, if it was possible. And logistically, we didn't make it work. But like everyone I talked to there was like, I first talked to a head of UNRWA in Jordan who passed me to someone in Jerusalem, who passed me to someone in Gaza. And everybody was like, yes, I'm so glad you're doing this. Like, even if it doesn't work, for the food to come in, just how symbolically powerful this action would be, and such a powerful contradiction. And then there, at the same time, and kind of in the back of my mind when we were imagining it was, one of the things that, I think part of my power as an organizer and as a rabbi is that I'm actually very stubborn. So if I see something that I don't like, I will really kind of like want to keep pushing. And a thing that's kind of I haven't been able to let go of are like the images of the right-wing settlers that have been blocking aid trucks, and the kind of unimaginable cruelty of that. And so part of the idea was that we could actually be the opposite picture and give like an opposite picture in people's minds, that instead of having to look at videos of people destroying food and trying to block aid from Gaza, where there's, a man-made starvation at the hands of the Israeli government of 2.3 million people, there would be this other image that we could offer, and a way that we could be kind of modeling, right, how to be in our integrity. So we put together this action, and I'm happy during the Q&A to answer any like detailed questions about the action that we did. But maybe now's a good time to show the video, and then we can explain more about what actually happened when we went ahead and did it.
We should not have gotten here. This war should have ended 6 months ago. But right now we know that the only way that hostages kept by Hamas in Gaza, people unjustly held without trial in Israeli prisons, we need a ceasefire, we need an exchange just for the beginning, but we need to live this region of Gaza. And we need to simply recognize that every human being, regardless of their background, regardless of how they look, in which language they speak or religion they do or don't practice, deserves freedom, deserves liberty, deserves liberation.
We are here today. A delegation of U.S. rabbis have come here urgently in this time of moral crisis to attempt to bring food to the 2.3 million Palestinians that are currently under siege and enduring a man-made starvation at the hands of the Israeli government. Just the other day, we sat at our Passover Seder and we said, let all who are hungry come and eat. And if the words of our tradition are to mean anything, they must mean that we do all we can to save the lives of the people of Gaza and to ensure that there's a permanent ceasefire now.
So that's a little visual of the experience. So basically how it worked is we organized cars from Jerusalem and Tel Aviv of Israeli activists and drove to a location on the road to the Erez crossing, which is the crossing in the northern crossing. And we decided to go to the northern crossing because we know that the famine is actually most acute in the north, first of all. And second of all, because the International Court of Justice recently ruled that Israel needed to open all the borders to let all the aid in. And so we wanted to highlight, we wanted to be able to raise attention that actually this border is still closed, right? It's still, nothing's getting in, and to highlight the imperative to open it. So we decided to go to the Erez crossing, and actually a number of times, the Israeli activists that we work with, actually the first person you saw in that video get arrested, the Israeli cops knew who the leader was, and so arrested him first and was like, goodbye to that guy. But he is wonderful, longtime activist, and he went actually on 3 different occasions to drive the route to see if it was open. And actually every time that he drove there, he was able to drive straight up to the crossing. There were no checkpoints on the road. He was able to drive straight up. But when we got there, there actually was a checkpoint on the road and there were police there. So it's likely that they knew that we were coming. And one little note was that when he went and did the scouting, he noticed that the battalion that was stationed at the Erez crossing is a battalion that you actually might have heard of. I know a lot of us aren't keeping track of the names of battalions of the IDF, but the battalion that was there is actually called Netzach Yehuda, which is the battalion that the US government was actually preparing to sanction using the Leahy law, and then backtracked. They're an ultra-Orthodox battalion that was actually so violent, they were taken out of the West Bank and put at the Erez crossing. So that was a note that he had during, which was a little nerve-wracking, right, of imagining encountering them directly. And I think one of the things that we were really nervous about was primarily nervous about encountering the right-wing settlers, right? And that we actually really wanted to avoid that. And so we had 2 different scenarios of which checkpoint we would go to, and scouts went in the morning to make sure that we weren't going to encounter the settlers, because that actually would have been a much more dangerous proposition, especially if if there wasn't police there, right? Actually, in this weird way. So we went down the road on foot, which was something that was also advised by our Israeli comrades. And these are just to emphasize that these Israeli leftists are people who have been spending most of their time in the streets, not just since October 7th, but for decades, right? These are long-term activists that, have been arrested more times than they can count, are spending most of their time now in and out of the West Bank. So we really felt like we were in good hands as far as the safety of the action, because they would be able to tell us, now you need to retreat, or this is, they would be able to read the room in a way that we weren't able to. So the fact that we were collaborating with them was actually really essential to the safety of the action. And so they advised us to be on foot, just for de-escalation purposes. So, we were walking towards Gaza on the road, and we were not very far. I think we were just a kilometer or a kilometer and a half from the border, right? Which in itself was such an amazing, I know, Brant, I'd love to hear what your experience of it was. I don't think we've talked about what it felt like walking down that road, but for me, I felt like it was such an important, I mean, I knew this intellectually, but there was something about really understanding, like, it's right there. It's actually a place, right? It has this idea that it's like so far away and these horrible things are happening and there's no way to go there or no way to be near it, and to protect it. And I just had this sense of like, actually it's on this road. Like we weren't taking special, we were just like drove and turned, and that road would have taken us straight to that crossing. And I just really hoped that even our presence there could somehow be felt, and that I really was like trying, like in my heart was like, felt like I was walking there, even if I understood that I wouldn't get there. Like I earnestly felt that in the moment in a way that I wasn't quite expecting, that sense of like proximity to it to feel so powerful. Brant, do you want to share what your experience was of that?
Sure. Of the walk,
The walking, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my overriding feeling was that I really, really felt like I and we were where we needed to be at that moment, without a doubt, 100%. This is where we have to be. And, there was many, many obstacles to getting there. Alissa mentioned about her stubbornness, but we didn't really go into detail. We were supposed to do this right before Passover, and then the rockets from Iran started raining down and all of our flights were canceled, and we almost didn't do it. And then we met and we said, no, we're going to try to do this. And we put it ahead a week. We all bought new tickets. And then it was getting through passport. And then, all of the various scenarios that our Israeli friends and comrades told us could possibly happen, including, they said we might not be able to get out of our cars. They would have just come up against us and forced us to drive back. So it all happened. We were able to do it, and that was a deep feeling that for all of the obstacles in our way, we were able to make it to that spot. And then the final thing was that I had the opportunity to visit Gaza several years ago in 2017, and I walked the Erez crossing, with my AFSC staff people, and that's a whole nother story in and of itself. It's a very dystopian kind of checkpoint. And I spent several days in Gaza that were incredibly important. And, it was not that far from where we were, and I was acutely aware of that. But seeing Israel from that side and seeing the smokestacks of the power station in Ashkelon from the south, which I had never done before, just knowing that I was returning to that spot, but that I was not going to be able to make it through, and the Gaza that I experienced in those days didn't exist anymore. It was gone, and it just, there was a deep feeling of deep conscience that I was returning to that place, and again feeling like this is absolutely where I need to be and the people I need to be there with.
Well, it's beautiful. I realized that it's true that I did skip over the fact that you had to like resurrect the whole action from scratch at the last minute. Like it's
astonishing that it happened at all. It really is.
Really is. It really is.
I should say it's a lot of it has to do with our Israeli friends on the ground, but a lot of it had to do with Alissa as well. Her stubbornness.
Yes, right.
She's not joking about that.
Yeah. I will share a little detail that some people might be interested in, is that in 2017, I was co-leading an interfaith delegation to the West Bank when myself and some comrades were stopped from boarding the plane in the US at Dulles Airport because of our support for BDS. So when we planned this action, I actually didn't know if I was going to be able to get into the country, which was a big gamble. And it was nice of everyone to keep going, even as I was the leader of the action, like knowing that it might happen that I actually might not even be there. And then when I got to the airport there in the US, the same thing happened that happened when I got to Dulles Airport in 2017, where I go to check in and they tell me there's a security flag on your thing, go over here. And that happened this time again at Newark Airport. And there was a security flag, but then they called somebody and I got cleared and got a boarding pass. And I was like, phew. And like the gate agent was like, oh, don't worry. Like I didn't say, I was like, oh, what's going on? And she's like, oh, it's happening all the time because your flight goes to Tel Aviv and it's heightened security right now. Like she was not worried about it. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to worry about it. So then I get there and we are going through passport control. And then I did get flagged again and got pulled aside. And then it was sad because Brant and the others I was with got in and I had to, I had to go my separate way and they went theirs, which we had talked about that if I got pulled aside, people should just keep going. And it was interesting because they held me for about 2 hours and asked me a lot of questions. And I did have actually an Israeli comrade from the organization Zochrot let me, she was my contact that she agreed that I could provide in the event that I was stopped. And in fact, they did have me call her and get her social security or Teudat Zehut, the like equivalent of a social security number in Israel. And, after an hour and a half of back and forth, and I was like, okay, I'm not getting in. It seems like I was like, was starting to lose faith. The guy who was questioning me was just like, don't make me work for it so much. Just like, tell me who you are, like what's going on. Cause he clearly knew, but we were both not saying it for, like, I was like, I'm not going to say, so then finally I was like, he's like, what do you do for work? And I said, well, I run an organization called Rabbis for Ceasefire. And he said, well, that sounds like a relatively new organization. What did you do before that? And I said, well, for many years, I helped lead Jewish Voice for Peace. And he was like, okay. And he's like, I don't think protests work. And I said, okay, like duly noted. And he's like, are you here to do a protest? And I said, no. And then I said to him, what are you worried about? Like, why are you worried about letting me in? And he said, I'm not worried. He's like, the only things I'm worried about is my shift is over in an hour. And is the gym going to be too full when I get there? I was like, okay, it was such a weird dynamic. So, and then they let me in and it wasn't really clear exactly why. They were like, okay, we'll give you permission, but you could only stay till Monday. There was like a date. They would let me stay for a few days. So that worked out. So that was my first experience with interrogation, but then I had a second one after I was arrested. Some of us who were arrested were taken to the Ashkelon police station, which is where I was, and some were taken to Sderot police station. And so me and two others, and actually one of the things of note is that they arrested Kobe, who was the Israeli activist that we were working with, first, because I think he was obviously the leader. And then they took me because I think they could tell that I was the second leader. But then they actually just took women. And our theory, the Israeli activists thought that they didn't understand that we were also rabbis.
I think it's because you were all the women were our leaders.
You think so?
Yes. All the people who were taken were leaders of some sort, and they were all women.
Yeah. Well, so different theories. We don't know. That's true. It is true. That's nice. I like that. So Jim, I see your question. It's a good question. So when we were held for a bunch of hours, and it turned out this was my biggest mistake of the whole thing, which for those of you that have been doing arrestable actions in this time, you'll know this, that when you prepare, you write the phone number of a lawyer on your body. And we did not do that. And then there we were in the Ashkelon police station with no phones, no wallets, no way to call anybody, and no phone numbers of any lawyer or any person, you know? And I was like, oh my God, rookie mistake, you know? And I actually don't even know how I think what happened, and it took many hours, but we finally were able to speak to the lawyer. And then after we were let out, it turned out that the lawyer, who was from a group called the Human Rights Defense Fund, it's like a collective in the region, was actually like calling the police station constantly, trying to get them to let us talk to them. And it just took about 5 or 6 hours before we were able to. And then we were each interrogated. And when I sat down, Jim, this will answer your question. We sat down for the interrogation, the police officer said, so you're being detained because you tried to bring food into Gaza. And our lawyer instructed not to reserve the right to silence. So I said, no comment. And she said, you tried to bring rice and flour to the people of Gaza. And, it's like, I was like, wanted to be like, and what's the problem, but that was the crime. The crime was you tried to bring food to the people of Gaza. And then after, she asked me more questions and I refused to answer, and she was getting, no, like, you know what, Jim, and while she was saying it, I was like, I need to get this transcript, because it's like our press release, like what the words she was saying, I was like, this is literally what we said about what we're doing, and I was wondering, I had been meaning to reach out to the lawyer and be like, is it a thing that we can request the transcript of the interrogation? Because she was taking notes on a computer the whole time. And so I'm not sure. I don't currently have it in writing.
Don't forget to tell them about the mouse pad too.
Oh yeah, I will. Well, I'll tell it after. Well, it like went into my subconscious. I have to tell it chronologically. So after she asked me questions and I was saying, I retain my right to remain silent, she was like, if you don't answer our questions, we're not going to let you back into the country. And I said, okay. And then she kept asking me questions. And then after she was done with the questions, she like turned off the recording device, or at least pretended to, and was like, I just want to talk to you, you and me. And then she said, and she just proceeded, because I was like, felt like from the advice of the lawyer that I should stay silent and not say much. So she proceeded to kind of, it felt like hours, but I think it realistically might have been like 20 to 30 minutes where she just was kind of yelling at me about how she couldn't understand why in the world I would do this. How like it absolutely made no sense to her, and that I'm a Jewish person and that I would want to feed the people of Gaza because there are no innocent people in Gaza. There's nobody to feed. And, it was at the time, like I was trying to like wish myself somewhere else. Like it was just so unpleasant to listen to her say such genocidal things. She was saying there's no innocence, and that includes babies, and that includes fetuses in the womb. And there's no one, that you should be helping, like that lives in Gaza, And so as, it was intense, because as she was talking, I was just like looking around the room, and there was like a picture of her with her toddler. And I just was like, how is this woman a parent? Like, it was just like shocking to me, right? Like, here was this picture of her with her child, and that it's at a point where she was saying, there's even the babies, they're like, there's no innocence. And then what Brant was referring to was the mouse pad, which is something that detail that I didn't remember until last Shabbat, when my family was bringing in Shabbat, and we have this kind of silly song that we sing before we light the candles, where the kids give tzedakah before we do Shabbat. And we made up these words where we say, we all share the loaf and point at the challah. And then we say, fulfilling our duty, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. So we rhyme loaf with tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, which means justice, justice, you shall pursue. And so last Friday, we sang that. And as soon as we said the word tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, it like came to me that like while she was interrogating me, I was noticing her mouse pad, which had the Israeli police logo on it and said tzedek, tzedek, tirdof on the mouse pad. And it just like, it was like such an incredible kind of distillation, right? Of like, this is how we have different relationships to Jude. Like, we are just like, we have start with the same primary text, but it just means something completely different. And is used for just such different purposes.
It occurred to me that I think the Hebrew name for Rabbis for Ceasefire is Rodfei Tzedek, right? The pursuers
Rodfei Shalom, but yes. Maybe it should be Tzedek. We should change our name.
Well, we invoke that line all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was, yeah. And so I've been, since that recollection, it's like now, and I went to synagogue at Kol Tzedek the next morning, and then we have a big Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof banner there. And it's like, it's been a thing that I've been wrestling with, kind of how to square that, you know, and it kind of reminded me of the cognitive dissonance I see as the phrase, where when I was in rabbinical school, I spent my summers doing human rights accompaniment and protective presence in the West Bank with Palestinian farmers. And I remember one Shabbat that I spent there, like I had spent the day kind of protecting a shepherd, helping him, graze his flock who had been threatened by settlers. And then the settlers were at this, little outpost near where I was staying. And when Shabbat came in, like I could hear them reciting Kiddush, like in the same words that, like we all say the same words, right? And the Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof mouse pad kind of reminded me of that like moment of theological and communal crisis that I felt, kind of hearing the Kiddush out of my mouth and hearing it out of their mouths when we had spent the day at crosshairs. So, and then we were released. We agreed to sign, in order to be released, we agreed to sign something that said that we would not return to the Gaza border for 15 days. And that if we did, we would have had to pay 2,000 shekel. So they let us off easy. And we were there for about 10 hours. And as I said before, we didn't know if anybody was going to be there for us. It was already Shabbat when we got out. It was like 10:30 p.m. And we didn't know how we were going to get back to where we were staying, because we were in Ashkelon. And then one of the Israeli leftists was there in the lobby of the police station when they let us out. And I was like, oh my gosh, how did you know that they were letting us out? And he was like, how did I know? I've been sitting here for 10 hours, right? He was like, which I should have known, but there he was with like baskets of fruit for us. And he had just been sitting in the parking lot of the police station for 10 hours waiting for us. And which was really special. And the Israeli commoner was also released that day. The people in Sderot had a shorter stay than we had in Ashkelon. And then, it was, I think one of the things that I'm really reflecting on, and then I'll stop talking and let Brant get a word in edgewise and also hear from you all, is how important it felt to the Israeli leftists that we came there and did this action with them. The Israeli left has taken a huge, huge hit since October 7th. I don't know if people have relationships with Israeli leftists on the ground, but a phenomenon that has sadly taken place is that a lot of the people who used to associate with the left have started saying that they've, quote, sobered up, and realized that there's no peace possible with Palestinians, and they had been deluded that it was possible. So there's this rhetoric of sobering up, that has kind of really hemorrhaged the Israeli left. And I'm feeling, and I think from this action, kind of I got a renewed sense of how important it is, that we are building alliances with the Israeli leftists there, right? And supporting, they live, in a, just kind of imagine, right? Like what it's like to like have politics of solidarity with Palestinians and to be living inside of Israel right now, where as a society, the dehumanization is so complete. And some of the Israeli leftists I talked to were talking about reading up on denazification of Germany. Like, how did that work? And what did that look like? Like, what is it even, like, how do you do it? Like, what is even possible for a future there? But in the meantime, they're living amongst people where they're like afraid to talk in front of them or talk to anybody in public, because it's like, you never know what's going to come out of somebody's mouth. So it's just like, they like are afraid to kind of like engage in just casual conversation with anybody because of the way the climate is. And it's not like here in the US where you can like find your people and live in a little neighborhood and know you have your people around. Like there isn't a place to live like that in Israel, where it's like, here's a neighborhood where, it's like, so I just am, I'm feeling a renewed sense of commitment to kind of strengthening the people that are there and buoying them and supporting them, and linking arms with them to build a Judaism and Jewishness outside of Zionism, and that's a point of connection, even as, we're rabbis and they're secular. And we actually did participate. Rabbis for Human Rights came and participated in the action with us, and a bunch of Israeli rabbis did too, which was really wonderful. But there was an interesting cultural divide from the secular and the religious point of view. It was the first time a lot of these activists came to an action where we were chanting Jewish liturgy and words of Psalms and singing. Like that is not the approach that they usually take. Brant, do you want to add anything, or how do we want to proceed?
Yeah, maybe I'll just say a few words and then we can open things up. And I think we were planning on trying to end around a quarter past the hour. So to give you just, I want to underline some of the things that Alissa said, but just to give you a sense for those of us who weren't arrested, what happened after our friends were driven away. So you saw in the video that the police started shoving us back, and they sort of grabbed us and shoved the rest of us back, and they had made the decision that they had arrested those who they were going to arrest. And they said to us, we'll give you a choice. You can either get in your cars and drive away now, or we will take you and drive you out to the middle of nowhere and leave you there. And, we didn't have our phones, we didn't have our wallets. And we together, Americans and Israelis, made the decision to, it had been about 4+ hours at that point, I think, made the decision to end the action and go engage in jail support. And the Israelis knew immediately where you were taken. They just knew. They scouted everything out. They could tell that the police were from Sderot, so they knew that some of the people were from Sderot, taken to the police station there. And they, just because they're veterans of this, they knew exactly where to go and where to set up jail support. And that's what we did. And then we were there for a while, and the Israelis said, when they get out, we're gonna need these cars for them. So we headed back and greeted them when they got back, and spent Shabbat just sort of writing about our experience, talking about our experience. Alissa and I and some others went out with some Israelis, including Rachel Beitari, by the way, who's the director of Zochrot, who I think many people in this session remember from a conversation that Tzedek Chicago sponsored with her a few weeks ago. And it was wonderful to be able to see her, and the Israelis. What Alissa was saying about the Israelis can't be stressed enough. That these Israelis who are on the front lines, it's a very small number that are left. The rest have sobered up, so-called, and they really are facing huge isolation, and both professional shunning, physical danger of physical violence, social shunning, and so just being able to be there and hear them and show them support was a really important aspect of this as well. And I think we all went away feeling like we want to maintain those relationships. I remember when Rachel addressed us, there was a question to her. Someone said, well, why don't you, she was describing this horribly dire situation. Why don't you leave? Do you consider leaving? And she said, this is my home. I mean, I don't have a second passport. All of my family and friends are here. There's really, I don't have a choice. And, I think a lot of the Israelis that we met, they do this out of both the sense that they have, this is their home and they're going to fight for it. And they don't have this choice. We were told later that one of the women, you saw her briefly in a car. She was one of the drivers and in the video. And later we learned that she had been doing protective presence in the West Bank and was incarcerated for 8 days straight. And she had just gotten out, and she turned around and supported our action immediately upon getting out. They're constantly on call. They're constantly being called to the West Bank to do protective presence when they hear that there's settler violence going on. They have deep relationships with Palestinians, Palestinian activists, and Palestinian individuals, farmers on the ground. And they've, as Alissa said, they've been doing this for decades. But the stakes of this work now have been raised to an almost unbearable level. The other thing I'll say, and then we can open up, and Alissa knows I felt this way before the action. I was not crazy about being in Israel. I did not want to be there. That was the hardest thing for me, was just being there. The last few times I've only spent time in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and Gaza, and with Palestinian friends, where it feels like I just feel is where I need to be. But being in Israel proper at this particular moment in time was enormously, it was enormous. It was, I don't know the word for it, but there were Israeli flags on literally, I'm not exaggerating, every street lamp, sometimes multiple ones. There were billboards everywhere you look, Yachad LaNitzachon, together toward victory. It was very fascistic. It was, in an overt kind of way. And, I just didn't want to spend a lot of time outside, which was kind of strange when you think we went all that way. You'd want to at least experience it. But it was deeply, being there was just affected me in a way I was not used to when I've been there before. And when we listen to our Israeli friends tell us about just what it's like to live in that country in this moment. The other thing too was that there are pictures of the hostages everywhere. Everywhere you look, their faces are looking at you. And it's so very clear that this is a deeply traumatized country, that they are living in an endless loop of October 7th. When we were leaving the country, there are those little screens that they take your picture, when you put in your passport. And when we got there, I think, Alissa, you might have been with us, there were faces in those screens. And I said, oh, wait, we have to wait for them to, to reboot or something. And someone said, no, those are the hostages. Like, their pictures were on every single screen as we went through passport. So it's just, that sensibility is just so deeply toxically ingrained from my point of view, from my experience. And that was an overriding takeaway as well. I'm still sorting through it. Yeah, why don't we open things up?
There was a couple questions. There was about Israeli coverage. There was little Israeli coverage of the action, and that was partially because we prioritized international and American coverage. Like part of our goal, like, was to reach people who would impact the Biden administration, right, around the issue of humanitarian aid. So we prioritized American and international media. But there was Ayelet Waldman, who's a writer and journalist, joined our delegation. And she did go on 2 Israeli publication podcasts. She was on the Ynet, the Yediot Achronot podcast, and also on the Haaretz podcast. So there was some, and 972 Mag. And yeah, I think, but then we did get really excellent coverage in traditional media. I don't know if those of you who read the New York Times still, I know we've lost all faith in them, but they did issue a breaking news push notification to people's phones of our action. If you get those in your phone where it's like breaking news, it like said like, yes, they were. I think that's how my mother found out that I was there, was from the push notification on the phone. So, and we continue to have kind of reflections rolling. I know, Brant, your piece was in The Nation this week, and another rabbi on the trip had a piece in The Hill the week before, and Ayelet Waldman, who I just mentioned is on the trip, actually is going to have a longer piece. I think she has like a 6,000 word piece coming out in New York Magazine next week. I'm going to have a piece tomorrow in the Philadelphia Inquirer. So, there continues to be press ongoing of the action, and space for us to kind of reflect on it. And then as far as supporting the Israeli comrades, I think, I think a big thing is like helping to signal boost them, right? And so I am wondering about like, what are the ways that we can help get them in US media and kind of like have the actions that they're doing in such a dogged way kind of get some traction. One of the other rabbis who was arrested, Rabbi Alana Alpert, who's at a congregation in Detroit, she was arrested with actually 2 Israeli activists. And first of all, they were like, oh my gosh, the police were so gentle with us. Like, this is like, even though for us, they were like shoving us onto the street. They were so gentle. But then when they were kind of being detained together, Alana said that she said to them like, oh my, it's so hard not to have my phone and not to see like the coverage of our action. And the Israelis were like, oh, there won't be any coverage. Like, nobody covers actions. And Alana's like, no, I think there will be. Like, and they were like, no, trust us. We do this all the time. Like, nobody's gonna cover it. And so I think, so that has me thinking that there's actually a lot we could be doing to help them be seen and potentially help to grow their numbers and just give them, kavod and honor for what they're doing. And I don't know that they need, I think that some of the organizations that have staff people, like some of these are like activist collectives and that they're not like formal organizations, but organizations like Zochrot and others, certainly I know we are going to be like at risk for some of the funding that I know that they get from, that they have relied on to do their work, where Zochrot is dedicated to bringing the history of the Nakba into Israeli society. So I think us ensuring that they can continue that work through financially supporting them is actually really important.
2 of the collectives that I think many of the Israelis we are with are part of, there's one that's called All That's Left, which is largely Americans who moved to Israel, or Israeli Americans who live in Israel, but also Tayush is the name of another, TA'A YUSH. And you can learn more about them if you Google them, and I'm sure they appreciate support as well. There's also, I'm sure many of you have heard about a group called Omdim Biachad, Standing Together, which is a group of Jewish Israelis and Palestinian citizens of Israel that do protest work within Israel, 1948 Israel proper. They take on a wide range of different issues, but the groups that we're talking about really are Palestine solidarity collectives and activists who are organizing together with Palestinians in the occupied territories to end the occupation. And Zochrot is unique. There's a great article. I can see if I can post a link to it. If not, I'll share it in our newsletter. A great article in 972 Mag about sort of the landscape of the Israeli left. It was written before October 7th, but one of the points they make is that Zochrot is unique in this spectrum in that they're the only ones that unabashedly support and call for the Palestinian right of return and talk about reparations and very unabashedly. So I don't know, that's an organization for me that's very near and dear to my heart.
I love Zochrot. And actually, when I was at JBP, we published a kind of cultural translation of Zochrot's curriculum. They have a curriculum called How Do You Say Nakba in Hebrew? That kind of was, and we kind of did a cultural translation of it, meaning that curriculum was kind of like by and for Jewish Israelis and had a lot of like references to Jewish, like to geography in Israel that Americans wouldn't recognize. So we kind of culturally translated for an American Jewish audience, and it's called the Facing the Nakba curriculum. And it's so that was inspired by Zochrot. So that's just to put that plug in for them. And Rabbis for Human Rights is another one of the groups that helped us. And then like a lot of the activists that were part of Organize With Us are from like another kind of like collective that they're just called the Radical Bloc, and the Radical Bloc in Tel Aviv. So there are people you could try to find on, kind of follow them. You know, sometimes the images from that they post are really graphic. The police really rough them up at these actions. So
there's one other thing I wanted to mention to bring things back home. I remember when Alissa first called me about this. This was early on when it was still going to be before Passover. And one of the things you said was, that the protests in the streets were starting to wane. And you said, I kind of feel like we've done everything. We've pushed it as far as we can here. Now it's time to go there. But one of the things that ended up happening as Passover got closer was the encampment movement. It kind of exploded. And the solidarity movement now in North America, but also really around the world, has really just broken wide open in really powerful and important ways. And by the time we did this, it really felt like we were part of something really, really, on the vanguard of something that was really rising. And, when Hallie picked me up at the airport when I got back, she was telling me about the Northwestern encampment, and Northwestern is on the way home, and we just went and stopped by it. And it was, I was exhausted and frazzled and, full of emotions, but it really felt, it was exactly the thing I needed at that moment. But that after going through all that, to come home and see that there is this movement that's surging in such a way and continues to this day. And so in addition to all of the things we've been saying about, supporting those on the ground there, there are just so many ways that we can plug in now, because I think this movement is gotten its fourth or fifth wind in a major, major way, in ways that are truly inspiring. Does anybody has any more questions? If not, we can we can conclude. I don't know if Alissa, do you want to say some
I
final
have a
words?
question. I can't find the sorry, I can't find the
Oh,
hand.
that's okay, Jim. Go ahead.
First of all, I want to say how much I admire you, Alissa, and of course you, Brant, for what you've done, not just going to Gaza, but all your work. And in a way, what you've described of being arrested for bringing rice into a starving place is it's horrible, but it also is kind of like Monty Pythonesque also in some crazy way. But I had a question about all the demonstrations now in Israel, for a ceasefire. Is that a reflection of, left renewal, or is this like super right wing stuff? What's going on with that?
Yeah, these are, I mean, my take on them is that these are Israelis who are fed up with Netanyahu. They want the hostages back. They want the war to be over, not primarily because of the genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, but because of the hostages. And if you look at the rhetoric of these protests, it's about end this war, bring home the hostages. There's very little news about what's going on in Gaza and being covered in the Israeli press. It's available to them, but there's no, the social media, of course, is available. But over and over, we heard from our Israeli friends that Israelis are just not learning about what's going on. They don't care to learn, or they are actively just supporting it. But the whole focus is on returning the hostages. So if you look at the rhetoric of the protests, that's what really is starting to overwhelm the majority of Israelis now, is end the war, bring the hostages home. I don't know if Alissa, you wanted to add to that. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think, yeah, it's a little bit different than it is here, right? Like the call for ceasefire isn't exactly the same in that it's right, as Brant said, right? It's like it's more focused on the hostage, like returning the hostages, than solidarity with Palestinians or thinking about, that more fundamental root causes, so.
And, Rabbis for Ceasefire Statement and so many other ceasefire statements and resolutions make it clear that ending the war is the right thing for Palestinians and for the hostages. It's an abundance mentality that war is not good for anyone. And
I mean, the ceasefire is when most of the hostages got released. Like, it's actually the only time that was actually possible, So thank you all for coming. And like I said at the beginning, like, I feel like getting to tell the story is actually part of the experience. So I really appreciate you all receiving this and being interested in hearing about it. And I love that there's a question about if there's other actions like this being planned. And so I'm like, well, if you're interested. So we will keep you posted on that. We're just starting to get thinking about what we're going to do for Shavuot. But I just want to say, like, I've had over the years gotten to spend time with Tzedek Chicago, and what a important kind of Nachshon kind of community you all are. And I know that it's inspiration to so many Jews in the ceasefire movement in the US and beyond, the kind of Jewish community that you all represent in our building. And so want to appreciate you all for kind of showing us how to do it. And so, and allowing me in my own way to be a part of it.
Thanks, Alissa. And Nachshon, for those who might not get the reference, was the first one into the Red Sea. While everyone was hesitating, he was the one who dove in and said, "The water's great. Come on in. It's parting."
It's a pretty apt description of Tzedek Chicago, I think.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Alissa, and thank you everyone for being here. As Alissa said, we'll be in touch with more news of the work of Rabbis for Ceasefire and just coming out of the movement at large. But it's really an honor to be in it with Alissa and with all of you. So have a great rest of your evening.
Good night. Thank you.
Laila tov.
You.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.